Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great, great, great. I'm glad that I'm not talking to myself. Hello, everyone. Yeah, we are going to start now. I know that there's a couple of people that are still joining us, but we want to give enough time to the conversation. So we're going to start our webinar. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Hazel from Mental Wellness Initiative to give us a brief overview of why we're here today. Over to you, Hazel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Njabulo. And thank you for everybody, those that have joined in. I hope everyone can hear me. Am I loud and clear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I would like to welcome all our viewers and those who have joined us on this webinar, which is on destigmatization and the role of African culture and patriarchy. Thank you again for joining us and embarking on this transformative journey of understanding mental health and well-being. Firstly, I would like to thank our panel members who are passionately driving the issues around mental health and wellness in their respective spheres of influence and have become experts in their own rights. I am so excited to hear their views, experience, and perspectives on destigmatization and the role of African culture and patriarchy when it comes to mental health. This webinar is important and it serves as an enabler and understanding mental health and wellness and the conditions that cultivate stigma. In this case, it's our culture and the patriarchal systems. We also need our viewers to understand that this is not a conversation that seeks to disrupt the system. Rather, it aims to illustrate how these systems contribute to the deterioration of the mental health of our people by perpetuating harmful gender norms, which contribute to the perpetuation of stigma. So before I introduce our facilitator, I would like to share a couple of quotes from African scholars and advocates on mental health and wellness, who also share these views and highlight the need for a systematic review. I'll start with, let me just read it through. Kopano Ratale. Kopano is a South African psychologist and a scholar. Kopano says that patriarchy is not only about men, it's about a certain way of thinking and structuring society. It's about power being vested in a particular or in particular groups and about those groups determining the norms and values of the society. This has profound implications on mental health. Nombuso Shange is a South African gender studies scholar. She says that when we challenge patriarchal norms and promote gender equality, we contribute to creating a society that values the mental well-being of our members. Daniel Ingrid is a South African psychologist and mental health advocate. She says mental health is not solely an individual issue. It is deeply connected to societal norms and structures. Patriarchal systems can perpetuate harmful beliefs and impact negatively on mental health for everyone. Finally, we have Mumbi Macharif. She's a Kenyan mental health researcher. She says that stigma around mental health in many African societies is often perpetuated by patriarchal norms that discourage vulnerability and emotional expression, especially in men. Well, while there are many other scholars and advocates that share this perspective, I would like to implore all to take a deep dive and reflect on some of these perspectives and come up with a working solution that will bring healing and well-being to our people, and especially as we engage with our panel. Now, I'd like to actually hand over the next phase of this panel discussion to our facilitator, Dr. Njabulo, who's actually really lived up to her name. She's such a joy and brings so much joy. It's been a pleasure working with her. A bit about Dr. Njabulo. She is a research fellow at the Institute for Pan-African Thoughts and Conversations at the University of Johannesburg. She holds a doctorate in augmentative and alternative communications. Her thesis was titled "The Effect of Visual Aids on the Understanding of HIV Information in People with Low Literacy." Her research interests include health information, health system strengthening, African strategies, mental health, and well-being. Dr. Njabulo contributes to various research and public health NGOs and has published on topics including HIV, public health indicators, and includes public health indicators, and issues related to youth and mental health. Presently, she is spearheading the Public Health and Wellbeing Research Unit at the Institute for Pan-African Thought Conversation. This research unit is rooted in the Sustainable Development Goals, focusing on health and well-being, and is aligned to the objectives of the African Union Health Strategy. The unit also advocates for illness prevention and the adoption of wellness as a way of life, aiming to mitigate the necessity for illness and disease treatment while promoting positive and healthy lifestyle. With all that said, I would like to hand over to you, Dr. Njabulo, for the next slide.
Okay, wow. Thank you, Hazel. Thank you for that opening and for just giving us, really an overview of why we are here. I know that MWI, which is, the acronym for Mental Wellness Initiative, you do a lot of work on mental health, and you've been sharing a lot with us at IPATC. Obviously, one of the things that we hope to do is to have more conversations together and some similar settings such as this one. I think earlier on when we spoke, we also concluded that this webinar, and this is for our participants and our attendees as well, is like no other in terms of the fact that we know that most of the time when we hold these gatherings, we normally are expecting, some sort of like a formal presentation and things like that. So I want to just put it out there for our audience that we are going to have a very robust conversation. You'll see with the kind of lineup of speakers that we have, that the conversation will really be interesting and rich. But what we wanted to do with this conversation today is to really to dig deeper into the lived experiences and just draw on some of the work that our speakers have been involved in, which gives us a picture and also puts meat to some of the research that most of us would have read or heard or seen about mental health. But the purpose of actually bringing this kind of speakers that we have today is so that we're able to merge the research part with practice and with a little bit of experiences as well, so that our mental health understanding and conceptualization and is richer in that way. So I'm myself am very excited to hear from the speakers today. So without wasting time, I would like to introduce our speakers that are going to speak today. And like I said, don't be alarmed if you do not see a formal presentation. You will hear from the depth of their souls exactly the kind of work that they're doing. And we hope by doing that we are inviting you to engage in the conversation. We'd like this webinar to be as interactive as possible. And this is why we have conducted it in the way that we have. Our first speaker is Tracy Cotton. Tracy is the CEO of Mental Wellness Initiative. So she does work with Hazel. Tracy she has her foundations in psychology, and she's an expertise in trauma counseling and healing. She is a qualified or accredited gender professional from George Washington University. She's presently pursuing her master's degree in sociology, focusing on social impact assessment. I do believe that she's actually also a DJ. She's the co-founder of Mental Wellness Initiative, which is an NPO whose efforts are centered on building resilience, recovery, and they're focused on reducing inequality, vulnerability, and fragility. Tracy is a speaker. She's a talk show host. She's a mental health and wellness. She's a talk show host on mental health, and wellness, with a particular interest in factors that actually drive and intersect with mental health. At this point, I would like to hand over to Tracy to give us her opening remarks. Thank you, Tracy.
Thanks, Njabulo. You know, whenever I hear someone read my bio, I briefly wonder who they're talking about because it's been such a fascinating journey from humble beginnings to here and to be able to share this really cool space with some really cool people and doing what I believe is important work in the world. So I spent a lot of time thinking about how I wanted to tackle this. And in the spirit of bringing facts to a conversation that is sometimes non-factual in the way that it involves emotions, right? Our lived experiences in this mental wellness space, and really wanting to bring some data to a conversation that can be experiential and emotional driven. And our conversation today is about stigma, which is rooted in shame, which has got everything to do with our emotions. So I want to share a little bit about some research that we conducted last year. It was a national project, but it was a small exploratory project, and we really were trying to understand what mental health means in terms of healing. The context for that was around gender-based violence, but there were some really good findings that I think are valid to be sharing in this space. So we conducted a survey. There were participants from all 9 provinces. It was a mixed method approach. We had focus groups and we had interviews. And so once we'd triangulated our findings across all 3 of these methods, what stood out really strong for us was that 70% of our survey respondents had flagged stigma as the highest barrier or the biggest barrier to people seeking help for mental health issues. And that was very striking for us. So when you take that and you look at the fact that the World Health Organization and other global development agencies are increasingly recognizing that mental health and wellness challenges, they're increasingly saying that it is in fact the biggest cause of death amongst people. And we can unpack that further, but it's really an amalgamation of all of the long-term and short-term effects of profound mental health challenges. In South Africa, we're still in the top 1 or 2, depending on the season, of suicide rates amongst men. And we're seeing now that increasingly there are more and more Black men coming to be represented in that statistic. And the World Health Organization estimates that 20% of teens are dealing with mental health issues. And so from that, and from what we can see in our country on a daily basis, we're a nation in crisis, is what my belief is. We come from a traumatic past with a great legacy. And when I say great, I mean great in the sense of the scale, the size of the trauma and the pain we went through as a country. And that lives within us as people, in our families, in our communities, in our places of work, in our educational institutions. Our trauma is running our show, and particularly our unspoken trauma is running our show. But when you have that bulk of trauma and you have that degree of stigma, and stigma being the total mass of things, be it religious beliefs or cultural factors or your own family values or dynamics that prevent you from seeking help for your deep wounding, then it's hardly surprising when we see all of the other social ills that we have to deal with, GBV included, suicide rates included, the impact on our teens included. And so my point of departure is the following, if I whittle it down to one thing: we're a nation in absolute crisis. We cannot afford to shove the mental health conversation into a little corner. And COVID was a deeply tragic event globally, but it did open up the conversation around mental health, which were conversations that were only happening in side passages before. But COVID allowed us to start having these conversations out in the open, in a public way, with much less shame and stigma and so forth than would have been the case before. So my challenge for our robust conversation today is, how do we unpack this? What is happening in the stigma? What is it made up of? What role is shame playing in that space? What role is culture and patriarchy playing in that space? And how could we start moving the needle? Because even if we mass produce mental health practitioners and deploy them to every corner of the country, unless we deal with stigma, we're not going to actually move the needle, and we're not going to change people's help-seeking behaviors. Thank you, Jabulo. I'll park there for now.
Geez, thank you, Tracy. I know that you passionate people sometimes speak and go over the time. So I was actually feeling a little bit bad that when you started, I didn't remind you that we give the speakers 5 minutes because we're trying to maximize the conversation. But I must say you've done pretty well for time. You had about 2 minutes left, and yet you have said all that you needed to say. What a mouthful, what a great way to start us off. I know that you are very much pro-healing and pro-trauma, so we can tell from the delivery of that research. It wasn't just you giving us numbers and a report, but you are helping us to reflect on it already. Colleagues, as I said, I promised that we've got some speakers that are going to really shake us here. So our next speaker, I'm excited to hear from him, is Mr. Bongani Chinkanda, Bongani Chinkanda. Bongani is actually the managing director of Bravado Group, and he's actually a speaker on mental health and an advocate as well. He's a strong believer in solving client business problems, and he specializes in youth and mass markets. Also, he's passionate about bringing about big ideas to people. He has also a passion for developing entrepreneurs and leaders in the creative economy. Mr. Bongani has worked in trade and shopper marketing, and he founded Zua Media, a promotional goods supplier and brand activation in Malawi, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa. His dream of Africa brand thrust him into specializing into market access with a strategic focus on African markets. In pursuit of this, Bongani and his partners in Brave Group formed Bravado, a brand experience agency. He is, like I said, the MD, is a passionate speaker and advocate for mental health, which is powered from his personal experience, an avid sportsman who recently completed a 3-day mountain biking tour. So we are very, really, really excited to hear from Bongani, because when you read the profile, all you're hearing is this marketing, but yet in the end, there it is. He's an advocate, and there's a reason why he's here. Mr. Bongani, welcome to the webinar. We'd like to hear from you now. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I guess I'll start with telling a story, being the marketer that I am. So it was 5:30 in the morning. My mom and my dad, who are based in Malawi, were on a call with me. And my business for 9 years had failed, and I was in debts to the tunes of millions of rand. And I had no way out. And during that call at 5 in the morning, my mother, who's a Christian, was praying that her son, her only son, that's me, who I think I was 35, 36 years old then, would have the strength to face the day. And I just couldn't. And I was crying. I was in tears. I just couldn't stop crying at 5:30 in the morning. And while I was crying, I was just tired. I was tired of dealing with the issues that came with the business failure. So as much as my profile speaks of great achievements, my greatest achievement, I would say to date, was that failure. But in that moment, I couldn't see it as an achievement because I was in pain, but I didn't know what the pain was. My mom, who's a nurse, didn't know what the pain was. But bringing it back to the topic today, my dad was in the background screaming in his frustrations about how his only son was not being a man. He was not being a man because he was crying to his wife and frustrating his wife, and his wife was crying. So there was just this huge frustration between the three of us. And in his frustration, he finally picked up the phone for my mother and shouted, "You need to be a man, my son, Bongani. You need to be a man. I'm tired of you crying. You need to pick yourself up and be a man." And in that moment, we didn't know that I had depression and anxiety. And only when I tried to commit suicide, and don't be scared because I'm here, so I didn't die. So you can take a deep breath. But when I tried to take my own life, and ended up at a Kiso clinic in Parktown for 3 weeks to get treatment for what I now know is a disease just as cancer and can be cured just as most cancers or TB or HIV/AIDS, or it can be managed. In that my dad couldn't support me until we got to that critical moment because I was not being a man. Which brings it to the topic of patriarchy and beliefs. I also didn't believe that I could get the white housewife disease of depression, because in my growing up, depression was a white women disease who stayed in suburbs and didn't have much to do. But here I was, a Black man, a father of 3 boys, a business person who had all the trappings of what you call success, was locked up and on suicide watch in a hospital. Now, throw back 3 years later, when one of my sons was suffering from depression and anxiety, I took a different stance, and whereby we made a decision as a family for him to go see a therapist. And just as last week or a week before, where my son was running for head boy and he didn't make head boy, and we had to wait through the night to know what position he got. In his devastation, he wanted to cry. Not that he was depressed, but I realized that as Black men, we tend to grow up in an environment where we are not allowed to express our feelings. And I sat him down and I said to my son, if you want to cry, you can cry, because it is hurtful. You wanted this position. And I want you to feel the feelings before you go out tomorrow. And he did cry, I believe. I don't think in front of me. But in the next morning when I was dropping him off, I reminded him that it is okay to feel bad. It is okay to feel a sense of loss, a sense of disappointment as a man, because we're quick to say, be a man and chin up. However, I reminded him that as much as he was disappointed and he could cry, he needs to be in a position whereby he can fight the next day and be strong. So when we talk about patriarchy, in the experience of men raising boys or husbands trying to survive what we now face on a day-to-day, it's a situation whereby we are unable to live through that experience unless we have lived through it. So that's what I'll share today in this conversation. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Bongani, for that. The story is amazing. It was really touching for me when you said that you told your boy to cry, because one of the lines is "boys don't cry," and I think it speaks volumes when you just put it like that, because there's just so much that we can unpack. I just want to remind our audience and our attendants that we do have a chat box. So I saw 1 or 2 people have started typing their questions already. Please feel free to already start typing your questions, because it is an ongoing conversation and our speakers will be attending to your questions. But just as a matter of sharing the format, is that we were just giving our speakers a time, as you can see, to give us the opening remarks so that we get the conversation going. And then thereafter, we will engage them in a couple of questions. We do have some formal questions to ask them so that we know that the conversation in a particular direction, but we don't want to govern it. So your questions are most welcome. And so when we have that discussion, you will also be welcome to really chip in and comment and ask your questions, whether you want to type them or you want to raise your hand. So please don't worry. There will definitely be time to engage your questions, but you don't have to wait until the end. You can already start asking your questions, and that same goes for our speakers as well. You will start to see that on the chat box, there's a couple of questions as well. There's a Q&A actually portion, section, I don't know what you call it, tab, and that's where some of the questions are coming in, and please feel free to already start addressing some of those questions even before we've had our discussion. So colleagues, as we're moving on, to our last speaker. Last but not least, we've got Dr. Buntu with us, who has joined us. Is the founding director of Ebukhosini Solution and Shagamba Men of Africa. So Dr. Buntu is an independent community scholar and founding director of Ebukhosini Solutions, a community-based company in Johannesburg in South Africa. He specializes in African-centered education since 2002. He's a Pan-African educator, writer, mentor, practitioner, and has more than actually 30 years in the experience of conceptualizing and contributing to programs on social development, innovative entrepreneurship, and cultural empowerment. As part of his interest in practical decoloniality, one of the many issues that Dr. Buntu has focused on through his work is empowerment of African men. In 2010, he initiated the founding of Shagamba Men of Africa, a platform for dialogue and interventions to critically engage African men's role in healing and restoration of the African family. He holds a doctoral degree in philosophy of education, research on decolonizing African masculinities from the University of South Africa, and also a master in the same discipline, which is research on masculinity, rape, and culture. Pretty excited to hear from you, Dr. Buntu. Over to you.
Sanbonani Dumelang, Ekason, greetings and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for providing this platform to have a very important conversation and critically so. I'm very happy with what my co-speakers have placed on the table, so I will try not to repeat some of the great remarks that they have made, but maybe rather try to add a few thoughts. I do a lot of work with young Black men, not only young, but predominantly young. And I can also subscribe to the notion and the experience that African men are dealing with a lot and often feel that they have very few outlets to express what is really boiling inside. And I think what I would like to add to the conversation is today we are asking questions, especially around African culture and patriarchy. How does that impact on our understanding of mental health? And I think it's important to remember, first of all, I don't think it's fair to only ask the question to African culture, but it's relevant because we are on the African continent and we want to also critically engage with our own culture. But I think we also need to have a very critical look at other cultures that have placed themselves very heavily on top of the African culture and squeezed it out, made it redundant, made it look silly and stupid. And we're living with those scars and those traumas also within our cultural practices. I think we come from an understanding of a holistic sense of culture. I think in the Western worldview, we have gotten used to think of mental health as something that can be kind of almost taken out of the other components. But I would like us to remember Africa as a place that originally used to advocate and practice holistic health. Health in all the different capacities, spiritual health, physical health, racial health is something that we need to also discuss when we talk about this, because we have been raised, meaning we have been made into races in a hierarchy of worth, and we live with those traumas as well. Financial health, cultural health, ancestral health, and I would like for us to remember Africa as a continent that used to advocate and practice that. I think the next thing I want us to remember is also that we became a completely different people because of what happened historically and politically to us, the invasions, the genocide, the enslavement, the brutalization of being, reducing the Black being to almost nothing. And we carry those scars with us even today, even if we know that what happened historically should not have happened and was not right. But we haven't found our healing from it. And I think this is where I want us to also point fingers at other cultures, because many of us may have degrees, we've gone to Europeanized universities and we learn how to restore the mind, but we go via people like Freud, we go via people that we need to bow to and admit having a truthful picture of the world where in fact they don't. And that equips us to get titles and doctorates and now invite people into spaces of healing, while we are also harming them because we are also exposing them to further Eurocentric ways of dealing with pain and dealing with history. And when we do that, the centering of Africa is normally put outside of the center. It remains a marginal position. And I think the last point I wanted to say for now is that if we should take a very critical look at African culture, I think there's many problems that we struggle with the practice and understanding of African culture. And part of it comes from what I just shared now, the brokenness, the marginalization, the disrespect that we have lived with for hundreds and hundreds of years. We must remember that many of our cultural practices were forbidden by people who came to tell us that this is forbidden and made laws and regulations to make sure that those who still practiced would either be killed or at least be removed from society. And that's why we also live with a certain uncertainty about who we are, where we come from, how we should look at mental health and holistic health. And I think lastly, also on patriarchy, I would definitely admit that we have a skewed and broken understanding of manhood in many ways. And I like the quote, I think it was from Ratele, who talks about patriarchy, not just being a male dominion. It's patriarchy is also how we have learned and been brainwashed to think about the world and the hierarchies of power. And we live with them as African women and African men, and we assert violence on each other from the violence that was given or that was put on top of us. And I think this is part of the healing that I feel we also need to center, that how do we undo the harm? How do we undo the colonial scars that have been mounted upon us, that we often bring into our families, into our parenthood, into our how we deal with conflict within our families and our communities. And I'd like to provokingly say that the solution can never be Western. That the solution has to be anchored in a reality that binds us to our ancestral path. And I think that's both the undoing and the becoming that we need to do as African people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Buntu. Thank you to our speakers. So yeah, we have heard the speakers' colleagues. I just wanted to summarize a few points just to kickstart, and I'm not too sure if these will. I mean, our speakers, I might not be directing it to either any of you, but it's just a general sort of like observation. So what I'm picking up, across the speakers is that there's words like of course patriarchy and stigma and culture that are being thrown around, and already when one hears that, as you've touched on it, Dr. Buntu, there's a negativity that comes with it, because you already assume that it's negative, and you don't just assume that it's negative, you assume the negativity to be attached to African sort of ways of doing things. At least for me, that's what I normally, if someone says culture and they say negative and they say stigma, even sometimes when they say GBV, sometimes I'm thinking, what color is GBV type thing, So I think that's what I'm hearing, and I would like for us to unpack that a bit, to what causes that. And I mean, you've touched on it as well, that it's part of, like, and Tracy was saying as well, the history, the great history, which is not so great, and how we've been institutionalized to view ourselves as African. But I'm also hearing the fact that when you spoke, you used these nice words and said there's this financial health, social health, racial health. So if Africans are essentially such promoters and advocates of health, how then do we end up with this conversation that we're having today? Because there's definitely something there. And why is it that there's an element of maybe running away from the situation or not being able to deal with it? Or is it because we are saying that the methods and the resources that are out there do not talk to who we are? And then in terms of what Bongani was sharing, I was watching, I think, a series, I forgot the name, but I was watching this young Black guy who was going through depression. And when the therapist was asking him why he wouldn't talk about the depression to his wife or maybe his family, I think they also asked him about his family. He said something so profound. He said, I could never speak about feeling sad at home because my mom's always working. My dad all is known is that he wakes up at 4 o'clock. By the time it's 5 o'clock, he's out doing this or that, one of those hard labor type of jobs. But he was saying that nobody has time to be sad at home. So now that I've been experiencing this feeling and this, because there was a couple of things that were causing the depression, he said, I have not had the language because at home, like no one has time for that. And so how do I start expressing that when it's not a thing at home? Nobody talks about it. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts and then I think I liked what I heard in terms of like the fact that the African practices are healthy practices. And I think that some of the work that Tracy, you normally you might be talking to in terms of healing, us going back to ways and to the truth, to things that heal Africans. Because I know that, for example, when we study psychology, sometimes when we do the therapy module or the courses, it starts off on a very westernized view, and then when it comes to the African methods, it's almost like they are by the by, and they are just an add-on, and they are also themselves kind of built on the ways of the psychiatric model. And so I'd be interested also to hear your views on that. But that's where I want to leave it for now. And I'm going to throw it back to the speakers. I see Bongani's hand is up already. I know that our audience as well has started to raise some questions, but for now, I think let's just give our speakers time to reflect on some of those as well. Thank you.
Yeah, so Njabulo, I think the challenge that I think as Africans we've got, it's a mix of westernized education and also religion. And religion, I'll speak on the premise of Christianity, whereby we believe that, and I'm not anti-Christian, I grew up in a Christian home, but and I use the example of prayer by my mom, is that we believe that certain things can be prayed away or believed away. And then when we bring it to how our education system has been very westernized and almost to the rejection of African cultural practices, we then find ourselves in a disadvantaged situation. So I think it's very important that these sort of conversations are had, and to sort of double click in terms of, okay, so how do we understand our culture, and how do we get our culture and have these conversations that our culture accepts it? Hence, a person like myself, I mean, people always ask me to say, but how are you able to go on public platforms, on social media, and able to share your journey? And I think for me, it's that, is having a voice and multiple voices who've lived it and are saying, guys, this is my experience, and don't shy away from feeling sad, from not being okay, from admitting to your partner and say, you know what, I'm just not feeling okay mentally. Because if we don't do that, then it's a generational fight that we've got on our hands.
Yes, thanks, Bunju. Thanks so much. Do any of our other speakers want to also just add on to that, or any of the other observations that we've made so far? Dr. Bunju, yes.
Hey, jump in, and thank you for the great commentary. I think I just wanted to comment on patriarchy and African culture very shortly. And I'm not going to make it a big issue in this conversation because we need to critique our patriarchy, definitely. But you raised the question of when our cultures are critiqued and they are presented negatively, it feels like we need to just defend them. And I think that's what we do a lot, because we feel pressed into a corner where we need to defend the notion that we're not intelligent, that we are not just believing in hearsay, that we are not just believing in witch doctrine. Like we have a lot to defend because we are so we have been marked in such a negative light. But I think if we really can remember far back in our history, patriarchy was not our dominant understanding of how to organize societies. It was matrilineal. a lot of the power was passed through women and through their order and through their leadership. And even in societies where you maybe would find men being the quote unquote leader, the seat was given, instructed, trained, inducted by women who also would remove you if you were not, if you're not proving to be worthy of the power that had been bestowed upon you. And when I say this point, many people say, yeah, but that's hundreds of years ago we are talking about now. And I agree, but for us to, because we want to go forward. And if we want to go forward, we need to understand how did we get to this point. So my point is not that we should just go back and glorify, for lack of a better word, because some people feel that when we talk positively about African culture, we are trying to glorify and say that everything was beautiful. But I think, and this is my studies, I don't know how other people feel, but when I study the sources of ancient African cultures, I find a much better understanding of how to make a society work together with their differences, with issues like we have now, gender, complexions and races and languages and all of that. Africa had quite a great template to work with that. And that doesn't mean that there was no problems at all, but it was a much greater model than the one that we have in the world right now. And I want us to, and I'm saying that because I want us to draw from our ancient practices and history, because there's intelligence, there's power, there's science there. And through the Shabaka Men of Africa project that we founded 12 years ago, we do that. We bring men into dialogues, we bring men into spaces of sharing and opening up and guiding each other. And it's quite profound to see men who are stereotypically marked in this world as being quiet and not wanting to talk and not daring to really let out our vulnerabilities. To see every month, maybe 3 times a month, we go from township to rural village to a city, and we see men really speaking and talking their truth. So I think it's also about validating spaces and creating spaces where African men can fully be themselves, talk, and find the healing that is very necessary for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Muntu. I like that, not glorifying, because yeah, there's a tendency to feel like we are glorifying certain things when we only just are being proud of, you know, of who we are and what we always should have been. It shouldn't be a thing or a big event. It should be what we do all the time. But yeah, let me give over to Tracy. I have a follow-up comment. I have noted the questions in the chat. So don't worry, colleagues, we're not ignoring you. I'm just giving our speakers the chance to breathe through those comments that I made after their presentations. We've got time. I think we're all aware that the webinar ends at 4:30, but soon we'll be engaging also on your questions. So hang in there. Tracy, over to you.
Thanks, Jabulo. You know, on the topic of culture, it's a sensitive one for me. I'm a pavement special from Cape Town, and anyone who doesn't know what a pavement special means, it means that whether it's gifting or not gifting, I have the melting pot of humanity in my gene pool. So a part European, part Malaysian, and part West African, with a sprinkling of other things in between. I'm also married to a white Jewish man. So I live in the intersection between cultures and observing the way my colored people from Cape Town deal with our mental health issues, and then the way the white Jewish community that I get to see a part of deal with theirs. And I'm kind of always running analysis in my head and comparisons, not for the better or for the worse, but simply for trying to understand how these things show up differently for us. And I sometimes speculate, and I'm going to ask this question tenderly because it might be a controversial one. I sometimes speculate on when people are born in South Africa, but they are not Black. So I'm talking about colored people, white people. How do we come into the idea of an Africanized, and I love the wording that you used, Dr. Buntu, when you said, you know, that traditional pathway, the holistic Africanized pathways, and not being too heavily influenced by the westernized ways of thinking. But if you're a white person born in South Africa, and you've never been exposed anywhere in your family line to African ways of being, and in my case, being colored, because we're so mixed, there's no purity of a lineage of way of being, right? So I can't draw on my European roots, I can't draw on my Malaysian roots, I can't draw on my West African roots, because those roots are purely genetic ones. They're not experiential ones, and nothing has been passed down to the generation current on how our ancestors out of those different parts of the world might have dealt with things. So when we talk about an African perspective, and I know in the focus on that, we're talking about the broader landscape of Black Indigenous African. How do we also include those of us who are African, but have not inherited that beautiful, magnificent, Africanized thinking, that holistic, before colonialism way of being? And so there's a question in there somewhere, and I'm wondering if we could get into a little bit of that. And then while I've got the floor, if I may, I want to grab Zainab's question out of the chat box, where she's asking about empirical data regarding the most vulnerable gender. So there is empirical data, yes. But I almost want to say, I'm not sure that I would necessarily trust the data, because stigma hugely gets in the way of people even being honest, even in a private questionnaire where no one else will see my answers. Even in those instances, people are not being forthcoming, because the stigma just prevails us from often even acknowledging things to ourselves, never mind acknowledging it on a piece of paper or to a friend or to a counselor. And in the community I come from, you know, you're quite likely to walk past the therapist's office to go to, and it's a terrible stereotype, but there's some truth in it, to go either to church or to the bottle store, depending on your persuasion. But we would still have these default denial settings. So I wouldn't even necessarily always trust the data, like really check whatever data you find. And then in terms of vulnerable genders, I think patriarchy has hurt everyone in terms of mental health. It has robbed men of places and spaces and vocabulary to even have emotions. So, and I reference this every now and then when I talk about mental health, but someone once told a joke which was funny at the time when I was less mature, but in hindsight, it's not funny at all, that men only have 3 emotions. They're happy, sad, and angry, and women can just rattle on for days about our emotions. But there's a real tragedy in that. We've robbed men of the vocabulary of emotions, denied them the freedom to discuss their emotions and struggles. And when they do, we shame them and expect them to always be, you know, on this. And it's funny now, because even this is a westernized visual of riding in as a knight in shining armor on their white horse, ready to rescue the maiden, but never acknowledging that they themselves are in pain. And then and then we know how patriarchy has hurt women in the subjugation of women and all of the other things that women have experienced. So I think there's no winner as far as mental health goes and the influence patriarchy has had on that. I think all of the genders are brutalized by it. I don't think one gender is more vulnerable than the other, but I do think the way it shows up can be quite different for people of different genders. And so I'm going to pause it there. Thank you, Jabulo.
Trace, I just wanted to pick up your question around Africa, right? And I think for me, it's not about black or white. I think it's about Western education and Western understanding of African problems, right? Because when I think about patriarchy, think about the Afrikaner community or the Muslim community or the Jewish community, whereby patriarchy is a real thing, right? It's not a black-white thing for Africa, right? So I think I'll take patriarchy out of the way. What I believe is that, so I'll take it down to about how we celebrate a braai, right? So we've owned a braai as South Africans, when you think about it, that a barbecue or whatever they call it in the UK, it doesn't get to us, but it's a form of celebration that as a country we've owned. So in terms of mental health, and we say African, is how can we own that space together as South Africans, whether you're Cape Colored, you're Zulu from KZN, or you're a Zimbabwean who came here, grew up here, and you're part of the South African zeitgeist. How do we start having those conversations that are not Sigmund Freud driven, but around, okay, fine, here we are. We all went through apartheid. We went through Fees Must Fall. We went through COVID together. We went through the Durban floods together. And now our children are going through load shedding, right? And how is that affecting them mentally? Because we as South Africans can only come up with those solutions because somebody who's not experiencing load shedding in the UK can't give us that. So I think we are in the information age where thought leaders like yourself can start shaping what the African solution is and having these conversations. That's how I see it. So it has no point. You might probably have two Black men having the conversation with, but it is at no point from my side, and I'm sure Dr. Buntu as well, is at no point exclusionary of other races when we say African. That's how I'd put it.
Okay, no, thanks so much, Bongani, for that. You know, as you were talking, I was reminded of something that we discussed. I think we discussed with Tracy actually. We were talking about young people and youth and their mental health, and I know that it was mentioned even earlier here that some of the research by UNICEF shows that young people, they when they cite the sources of their mental health or mental ill health, one of the things that they cite is an unhappy or a sad community. And so and research shows that that impact of a sad or violent community has more impacts on the young person, the impact of violence within the home, because a sad community has that much. It's called, I think, social capital of the young people. So it's quite important what you're saying, because I often see also even on social media, you know, when we share, as you're saying, whether it's someone in the UK or in America and stuff, you know, when you share these things about what you love most about being South African, and people say things like, I like braai, I miss saying futsek, or whatever it is, you know, there's so much that we together culturally we share, and things that bring a warm fuzzy feeling to us. And so I'm saying this because also what I'm picking up as we're talking is that we are saying that there are instances and there are things that make us well. And I'm saying this because I myself like to, when I speak about mental health, I like to also try to unpack for myself continuously, you know, the concept of wellness, because as we're speaking, we're talking about mental health and most people think of it as an issue, as a problem. And I like that it's not like that in this conversation, that we're talking about illnesses. Yes, I know you've mentioned, Bongani, about, you know, having gone through depression, but I'm just talking about mental wellness as being what makes us okay, because when we can start from there, then we can be able to differentiate mental health for what it is, which is really a concept that moves on a continuum. Sometimes you are well, sometimes you're not well, but majority of the time you're supposed to be at your equilibrium, you know, aware of all the things that make who you are. And as you're saying, we ought to be a nation, or rather a continent, which is aware of the things that make us well as Africans, so that we can be able to start to pinpoint where things are going wrong, so that we know how and when to fix. So I would like to take this opportunity now. I'm not too sure if any of our speakers want to add on to that, but I do want to read the questions in the Q&A section. I was going to start with the chat, but I saw that Tracy started and she's addressed Zainab's question. So I'm going to go ahead and read Musiwa's question. And Musiwa says, is it accurate that as Black people, we don't have space to cry or interference of our social family setup has been interrupted by colonialism, capitalism, and Western religion? I'm speaking from a case in point where, as Basotho, we as Basotho, and of course other Bantu and Nguni, had a wider parental net onto our tradiac nature or family. Example, in a feminine line, one has a biological mother, maternal mother, malume, paternal mother, Mangwane. Ooh, this one setup has always had a broader fallback net. That is Mosiwa's observation. Mosiwa, I'm not too sure if I read that clearly enough, but if you want, you can clarify, if you don't mind. But that's Mosiwa's question, and I'm not too sure if it's addressed to Inan, but I'll speak because one of the, you can handle that. I think I'll just I'll read because it's just 2 questions. The next question is from Nell Louise. Nell Louise is asking, please explain to me the difference between Western mental healing and psychology and African mental healing and psychology. How does decolonized healing look? Right, so speakers, those are the 2 questions from Mosiwa and from Nell Louise. Thank you. And Dr. Buntu's hand is up. Dr. Buntu, you can go ahead. You can tackle the questions.
Thank you so much. I want to just to single out a few comments and maybe also the last question that came in or that you read out. I think, you know, Bongani, when you frame it as exclusion, of course, it sounds very negative and very brutal. But I mentioned earlier racial health. And as Ebukusini Solutions, and also in the space where we work with men through Shabaka and women, Kandaka, we are concerned about the African family. We are concerned about the Black family particularly. And with few resources, living to do this work maybe for a good 50 years or so, we feel that we need to make some choices about what we're going to do. And we have made it our sole purpose to really nurture the African being, the Black being, and only them, and only us. And the focus is not so much about who we exclude, it's about who we affirm. It's about whose needs we want to really cater for. Just like there are women's organizations and women's places, because there's a particular need for women to meet, we want to cater for that need for African people. And I think it's important that we disband the borders of this continent. When we see ourselves as Africans, we see ourselves as Malians, Senegalese, Botswana, we see ourselves as people of a continent. And yes, race does not explain fully who we are. It's a very problematic marker, but we have lived with it for generations. We have been, like I said earlier, raised. We have been made into a race, and a good amount of the challenges that we face are also very tied to that racial experience. So we are working very much on methods, ways of handling, approaching, finding restoration, also including what skin color has done to us. And we find that very meaningful and very necessary in a world that maybe we too quickly pronounce a rainbow nation approach when we see that that's not even the reality. And I think, so I just wanted to place that as an experience we have and that we worked with for the last 23 years. I think I also wanted to say that as a Pan-African man, I see a very huge responsibility because I move in a lot of spaces where there's a lot of broken manhood in terms of leadership, in terms of revering men for being or for performing a certain form of powerfulness. And I think I'm not against powerfulness. I think powerfulness comes with our people and comes with our culture. But the problem is when power is built so that in a way that makes other people less. And that's what Western and Arab patriarchy has done to us through religion, as was said earlier, and through it has taught us, it has internalized within us an understanding that as an African man, you are more worth, you should give direction in a demeaning and brutalized way, and women should fall into that. And that, for me, is against the African ethos. And then, right, just to the question that you read last, how does African and decolonized healing look? I think first we need to remember that to decolonize is not just to do something different than what the Western world has taught. It is really to shift the power. It is to continuously resist, and it's to undo the colonial effect. And I want to say it that way because when that practice is done, it shakes all of us, those who were marginalized by it and those who were centered by it. It's awkward, difficult, and painful for all of us. And we often want to dance around awkwardness. We don't want to go into the awkward. We don't want to go into what is difficult. But if we don't do that, we also will not resolve this. So we need to be able to talk about race. We need to be able to talk about difference. We need to be able to talk. Yes, we should also look at what combines us and what we have in common. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it, but if we are going to get to the solution, we also need to talk about why it's so difficult to get there. And I think in a very short, and I know this is a very undetailed way to explain, there's much more details to this, but just to give an example of a Western approach to healing and an African approach to healing. So Western healing, you could say that often looks at the symptom, whereas African healing looks more at the cause, like the broader issue, why you have a symptom that manifests. Western healing might be looking more at a medicine that is supposed to cure this particular symptom, whereas African healing looks more at, let me call it food, meaning think about how you make sure that you want to eat. And when you eat, you're not thinking of it as healing yourself. You're not thinking of it that I have a condition called hunger, so I need to heal my hunger with food. You just think, I want to eat so that because in a few hours I'll be going there, I'll be out the whole day, I'll be hungry. So you are preventing. And I think that's also a difference between Western healing paradigms and African, that the Western is more focused on the treatment, that you should get rid of this particular symptom. In a way, we should kill this symptom and take it away so that it doesn't manifest anymore, whereas the African approach is more about prevention. So it includes more holistic practices, dance, song, rhythm, clapping, communal practices, healing ceremonies, and it's not just a relationship between the person who has a symptom and a person who is a healer. Sometimes it's that, but it's also a communal job to create healing in the family and in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Buntu. I'm going to, I'm excited to see there's a couple of questions in the chat, and there's also a hand. So I'm going to hand over now to, I think it's Abdisalan, if I'm pronouncing it right, Mohammed. And I know that you also had a comment earlier on, which I typed a response to. I think you want to just say a few words. I'm not sure if it's a question. Definitely handing over to you. And then we'll continue with the rest of the other questions as well. Thank you so much. Is Abdisalan still here? Mohammed.
Yes, he's here.
Sure. Over to you, Mohammed. Hello, can you? Abdisalan Mohammed, you had your hand up, sir. Would you? You can go ahead with your question or comment.
Thank you so much. Greetings to all. Thank you, Banda, and all attendants, and also I greet Okinole. I am Abdisalan Habib from Somalia. I am the founding director of Somalian Development Organization, an organization that works in solving mental health problems within the country. You know, Somalia is one of the countries with mental health tragedies, wars and civil wars. So what I'm going to make, I want to make a comment, and also I want to give, to make a question to our honorable panelists. What I want to mention here is that the topic that we are talking about, which is about mental wellness and, the African culture and how they are related to each other. So the topic is so big and it needs, even a preparation. But what we are going to add is that, in general, when you look at the mental wellness, the thing that affects most is, the poverty and economic, problem that causes mostly, the mental health problems that occur in general, especially in Africa. It's only an economic factor that's causing the mental problem within African countries. Someone is mentally not well when he or she does not have something to eat or drink. Poverty is a very, big factor that can cause, a person to be mentally not well. Even if the person is mentally well, he may pretend to be mentally not well in order to get, money or economic, benefit in order to get so. That's why we are always, vulnerable, to be, affected by mental health problems from even, we have seen a lot of people commenting or saying that, the Westerners are the problem. Why are the Westerners affecting our culture? Why are they doing so and so? Why are they, delowering us? Why are they killing us psychologically? Because we are poor. If there is no poverty, if you are, a rich country, there is no one, who delowers you. So that what is most important thing is even, within African countries or within African countries, most of the marginalized communities, as you know, they are economically poor. They are being marginalized just because they are poor. For example, now that I'm from Somalia, in Somalia, the marginalized communities are the, economically the poorest, communities within the country. They are very mature, they have maturity within the country, but they are economically poor. And any other country in Africa is also like that. So I want, to make a question which is there, something that, makes, comparison? Can we compare poverty and, mental health issues? Don't you think that they have, a kind of lineage, Yeah, that's what we are feeling, so we are, the comment that I am making is poverty is the biggest issue or the biggest problem that causes mental, health problem within the world or within Africa. That's why our culture is always vulnerable to others. Our culture is always a culture that supports, Westerners, or that's always because we are poor. We want to get food. We want to get so and so. We want, even our government are begging the Westerners because the government is economically also poor. So that's what I'm going to make as a comment. And I would like to hear from other, speakers and attendees about the topic of poverty and mental health. Thank you so much, Najib Banda and other honorable people who are here for giving me the chance to speak.
Oh, thank you so much for those views, Mr. Abdesalan. It's very, very eye-opening. Indeed, you are right that there's definitely a correlation, between poverty and mental health. There's even some studies that have been done around the times of COVID that show that not only was that it came up, but it also made some situations worse for other people as well. So it's a great point, to raise. I see Tracy's hand is up. I'll give over to you, Tracy, and after Tracy, I'll definitely continue with some of the questions. I just want to read this one because it's a comment before I move to the Q&A. I know Robin was commenting earlier on. She's saying that really powerful strains of conversations are happening in this webinar, and she thanks the speakers so much. She also says that she's happy that we are speaking about GBV being experienced by people and not excluding men. So we're not necessarily saying that men are the perpetrators, but they also experience some hardships in this area. Tracy, over to you for your comment.
Thanks, Chapolo. So there's some data that we have that's actually been gathered by a partner organization of ours, where they do household surveys. They've got data on 30,000 households, and not just South Africa. There's now data coming from throughout Africa. But increasingly, this data is showing us that, so they basically measure concepts of poverty along different metrics in this household survey, and it's a tool that's meant to empower families to take some small actions that they can take, small but powerful actions that they can take to move themselves out of poverty. And increasingly what this data is showing us is that the families who address the mental health aspects of their home dynamic first also accelerate their movement on all the other metrics to get out of poverty. So, I mean, by pure logic, you can't look for a job or set up a business if you are, struggling with chronic depression and you haven't sought treatment for it. And that's a really basic example. But just to come to your point, Mohammed, that there's, and the relationship between poverty and mental health is varied, and we can tackle it from any number of places. But in terms of getting out of poverty, tackling the mental health component helps to accelerate every other effort that a family is making to get out of poverty. And of course, we know mental health issues are both the cause and an effect of being in poverty. So there's a vicious cycle that is there. So I just wanted to make that comment on Mohammed's question. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. That's a great comment, actually. Short and sweet, but quite a powerful comment to have made. So I'm going to go and go ahead and read some of the questions that are in the Q&A. So Anonymous says, how can you measure if time spent was worthwhile? I'm not too sure what time spent this one is relating to. Anonymous, if you're still around, you can clarify that for us by typing again, or if you want, you can raise your hand. And at the same Anonymous, I think, says Mr. Bongani Chikanda, has exercise and training helped you with your journey? Is it only training I can on if I want to fix my mental health? I think there's a missing word there, but I think we get the idea. And then another question that's for Tracy said, what I mean, Miss Tracy, how do I measure? Now Anonymous is actually clarifying. How do I measure my level of satisfaction in regards to how I use my time and my mental well-being? If I play a game for 5 hours straight, would that count as being mentally ill or something else? Is this a form of recluse behavior? And still, Anonymous Bongani, I see your hand. Yeah, okay, I think that Anonymous, sorry, I repeated. So that's question. So there was a question for Tracy from Anonymous, and then there was one for Mr. Bongani also about exercise. Yeah, you can go ahead. I think let's give Bongani, because Tracy just spoke, and then afterwards Tracy can speak. Thanks. Over to you, Bongani.
Yeah, so I think I cannot overemphasize the power of exercise in terms of how it saved my life, but also healed my depression on 2 levels, right? So one of the things they taught us when I was at a Kiso clinic was that keep moving helps you in terms of mental wellness. So when you think about when you binge Netflix for the whole weekend, by the time you get into Monday, you're feeling quite lethargic, and your brain has been overfed, and that's why even you're taught not to blue screen and all these things, because constantly there's chemicals in your brain that you work with. So exercise has got it releases endorphins, which are happy chemicals that help. So yes, exercise has helped me. I first started with running, and then now I cycle. And I think the other aspect of exercise, so there's just normal exercise. What I think has also helped me further is that I'm not a professional cyclist in any chance, but I challenge myself and have goals in terms of doing races. So a weekend ago, I did a race, a 60-kilometer race, and then I'm training for the 94.7, and then I'm doing that 3-day mountain biking for again in the Drakensberg. And why I use that as an example is that also having goals that you want to hit motivates you and helps you. So you know that saying, start off with a win. So if I know I've got a training, I need to train tomorrow for 1 hour, and I do that and I take it, it sort of tricks my brain to help me fight other fights. Because what I found with exercise, it's not dependent on anybody or any other circumstance, but you're the person that's in charge of walking the 1 kilometer, cycling the 10 kilometers for the training, and it helps you with that. Meanwhile, if you try to, let's say, I'll pay off my debts by end of September, then unfortunately you get retrenched and you lose your job. You sort of just like you feel like you're losing and there's no progress. But with exercise, which is not related to any metric or any external circumstances, it does help. So yeah, I do encourage exercise quite a lot.
Thanks, Bongani. Yeah, no, I can attest to the exercise. It really does work. I myself have stuck to exercising 10 years. It's not even doing what it used to. I used to do it for weight loss. It's a force of habit, but it definitely helps to reduce the stress. Yeah, and I do aerobics, so there's lots of music and dancing and things like that, and step and concentrating. And you know, I never really thought about why it actually helps so much. But one of these days, the instructor was explaining to us that why it works is also just simply because when you're in the class, you focus on getting the steps right and everything else. And I noticed that even when I go there and I feel like, you know what, I probably will not even be able to concentrate in class today. You'll find that if I go in there with a problem and then I leave class, say maybe sometimes I do back to back, I'll do kickboxing and I'll do step. When I come out, even if I came in with a problem, I cannot even go back and revisit the problem in the same way. It's not even like I was thinking about it. Something magical just happens whereby I come out, I'm fresher. It's almost like I can start afresh. And it's like catharsis. It's really great. But I understand also about the goal part. That's quite powerful. I've never really thought of it like that. But thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Tracy, and then Tracy, whilst you're on the podium, because we are moving towards the end of our conversation, you can answer your question and you can even give your closing remarks. Then I'll hand over to Dr. Buntu and then also to Bongani. And then if Hazel, you want to say something, you are also welcome to do you know, some of your thoughts. I will definitely still close, but we do have time and we have covered all the questions. So we can do closing remarks from the speakers in that order that I've said. And then Hazel, if you have anything else you want to say, and then I'll close the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jabulo.
Oh, sorry.
I feel quite indicted now by Bongani's passionate speech about exercise. That's a growing edge of my development, my friend. I'm trying to find that happy pathway still. So if you're giving lessons, please let me know. I think I want to tackle the question, and then I'll circle into my closing argument. So human beings are pain-averse creatures. You know, we're not readily going to run into the middle of a painful thing. And so when we speak about mental health and healing, the reason we even need mental health and healing is because we all come from a very high trauma base, and for an assortment of reasons, but there isn't a person on the planet who's not experienced some sort of trauma, grief, loss, pain, and the list can go on. And so we all have that as part of our makeup, and it's just a product of being in the world. But we don't readily run into what sits at the very center of our pain, what sits at the very center of our mental health challenge. And I want to differentiate here between mental health as a diagnosable clinical condition versus mental health challenges that are more the everyday, more common types of things. So if we're talking about bipolar, schizophrenia, clinical depression, those conditions are sitting on an end of the spectrum where there's a different sorts of interventions that are needed. But I do believe that before we get there, and it was Dr. Buntu, I think, alluded to it earlier, before we get to that point of clinical condition, there's a whole lot of preventative stuff that can happen. And Jabula, this is part of your work as well, I understand. Preventative things that can happen before we're in such a worn down state that things are becoming chronic and requiring medications and requiring hospitalizations. And yes, those things can come on as a surprise, but frequently you can actually map a slow progression of condition before it becomes clinical. But we ignore it, right? So Anonymous asked, you know, how I manage my time and how do I know if it's well spent? If we're managing our time in such a way that we're just masters at escaping our inner pain. So if we're doing 6 hours straight of Netflix, it could be escapism. But if you're a trauma surgeon and you've been on your feet for 36 hours in a hospital shift and you come home and you just want to crash and watch Netflix for 6 hours, I wouldn't think that is a bad thing because of what you've been doing for the other 36 hours. But if you do 6 hours of Netflix like every other day, then I would say, are you trying desperately to escape from some inner discomfort? and Netflix is a beautiful distraction. And I would say the same thing to someone who spends 6 hours every day in the gym. So Bongani's exercise was really directed towards the sense of achievement, and it was a healthy thing, and he had really good perspective on why he was exercising. But if you're in the gym whole day, every day, and just punishing your body, I would ask, what is the inner turmoil that you're actually trying to avoid by overexerting yourself physically? And so it's not necessarily only about how you spend your time, but it's about why you're spending your time that way. And if what you're doing helps to improve your net functioning overall as a person, it's great. If within that you're having the courage to have hard conversations with yourself, talk to yourself about your pain, your past, your current circumstances, and not avoiding those inner conversations, then I'll say you're fine. But if you're using anything, and I'm going to extend, over gymming, over Netflixing, and then there's a whole lot of other dysfunctional things, anything that would register as an addiction. Work can be an addiction, sex can be an addiction. We know about alcohol, drugs, we know about food. Anything that feels like you're just doing it to numb some internal pain that you really don't want to look at, that's not a healthy way to spend time, and it's probably not going to grow you as a person. So my challenge to Anonymous is to make time to be introspective and challenge yourself on what is the inner pain that I'm really trying very hard to avoid by doing these other activities. And do I actually need to deal with that pain? Because on the other side of that painful journey, but healing has to go through the center of the thing that hurts you most. You can't go around it or over it or under it. There's no shortcut. You actually have to face it. But on the other side of that journey is a much better version of you. And when I say you, I mean all of us. It's the collective you. When we have the courage to do our healing work, on the other side of that is a truly glorious version of ourselves. And so I'm gonna end this little bit by saying, what is the price of not doing the healing work? And are you prepared to pay the price? Because the price of not doing it is that you pay with yourself, but the price of doing it is that you win yourself. And you are, of course, the ultimate prize. And so my parting comment, Jabulo, is that I would like us to see cultural practices that come away from this idea of promoting shame as a punitive measure for people who want to seek, mental health and healing facilities. I think stigma and shame are Siamese twins, and they really live together. I'd love to see a world in which, and to this notion of an Africanized, unified way of being, a language that creates unity around this topic, that is not racially divided, it's not culturally divided, but it actually comes to this idea of, as the human race, we're sitting in pain, and South Africa represents the human race beautiful in its complexity. And could we create a language that draws from the wisdoms of all of our cultures and faiths, that helps us speak about mental health issues in such a way that we can truly destigmatize it? Because, as I said at the beginning, even if we mass produce mental health practitioners and deploy them to every corner of the country, if we do not tackle stigma and shame, we still not have removed the barrier for access to those mental health practitioners. And that would include traditional practices, Western practitioners, alternative, complementary, all of them. Stigma keeps people away from all of them. And so that is my parting comment. And thank you, Jabulo, for hosting us and facilitating today's conversation. And thank you to my fellow panelists and to everyone who has listened in and participated today. Much gratitude. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tracy. I was going to comment, but as you went on and on, I have so much that I want to say, but I'll hold it in, because I think I don't want to take away from how well you've closed it off. So I'll just leave it at that. Before I hand over to Bongani and Dr. Buntu, I want to just read this comment from Willie. I was actually not going to read it, but I think just as a way to hand over to you, Willie, I'll read your comment. Willie says they would like to thank Bongani for raising the issue of faith and mental health. And Willie is offering his or her experience. I was raised as a Christian, and I was shocked at my level of ignorance about what I claimed to be. Because of my ignorance, I accepted views that I didn't test as long as they came from what I believed was a credible source. I therefore agree with Dr. Buntu that there is a wealth of knowledge that responds to mental health in our African cultures. This has been true to those I have interacted with intimately. What I now believe is the lack of knowledge or outright ignorance is a serious contributor to the understanding and interpretations of the teachings that come that would need to consider that our spiritual beliefs are largely driven by adopted or inherited beliefs, which remain untested. I would like us to flesh this out at some point, how prevalent is in upholding our experience of patriarchy and in our to mental health issues. So that is a comment, and I think a challenge for future from Welile. And with that comment and those words, I would like to hand over to Dr. Buntu for his closing remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and I completely agree. So much to say, so much to comment on. Thank you so much to very inspiring inputs by my fellow panelists and also great questions. I think in my parting words, I just want to say and invite those who are interested in co-creating more methodologies and more approaches from an African point of view, particularly for African communities. We talk a lot about men, but we also have programs for women, program for children, program for families, because that's really supposed to be the power unit of Africa. And we know we are very challenged when it comes to the issue of family. And I think this is why also within our work with men, we presence a lot of understanding what women go through and vice versa, because the key to me fully being a man is also found inside of a woman's experience. And now I'm not talking about romantic relating, I'm talking about understanding the experience of my counterpart. And I think we have too few of those conversations. I mean, as men, we're still battling with just presencing our own story, let alone listen to others. But it's when we presence our own that we are able to open our ears and hearts and souls to really listen to our counterparts and our family members so that we can get to a sense of communal healing. Mr. Habib, I loved what you said about poverty. I think it's a very, very important conversation. When men, and of course women too, are not able to contribute to the economy, are not able to feed their families, are not able to survive, how that affects the mind and the spirit in a very detrimental way. I tried to send you a message, Mr. Habib. I would like to stay in touch with you. So if you find that message, please respond to it. And just saying thank you. If we are allowed, I would not mind dropping our contact details in the chat, but I will leave that to the program director to guide us for anyone who would love to stay in touch with us. But lastly, thank you for what everyone is doing. I see so many great initiatives. We can get kind of swallowed by all the problems and challenges, but also let's remember that there are many men out there who are changing their ways. There are many women who are very supportive and also doing their work. And as we see it today, there are many great people who are doing incredible work. So thank you for the time that you take to be one of our solutions in the world. Thank you. Ashe.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Buntu. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but what would you perhaps have a little piece of advice for a young man who wants to know how to navigate the modern world as a Black man, especially in the absence of role models within the family structure? If there was someone like that in the audience, what would you say to them?
Yo, Jabulo, you just extended this meeting with 2 hours. Now I'm going to be on the microphone for a long time.
Briefly, please.
I'll try to be short, but I think let me single out, and there's so many things I could say about this, but let me single out one thing, and I'm saying this, I'm phrasing it as a challenge to those of us who are men who have walked on this earth for a little bit longer than this young man that you are mentioning. We are all called to be mentors and provide some sense of fatherhood. I think as Africans, we come from a place where everybody was a parent. As long as you are maybe 18, 19, 20 and up, you are a parent. And it's your role when you see a child being lonely, misbehaving, doing something that they should be assisted with. It is your role to pick that up and go towards that child and be there for them. And I think even in a related way, in the so-called modernized world, we need to, I think that's an incredibly important value to bring back. So what I would say to a young man, and I speak a lot to young men, first of all, I want him to know that I see him. Because some men may not want to speak, may not want to share, are not sure if an old man like me is even going to listen and not judge or not shame them. So they have the right to be fearful because they don't know if I'm actually going to be listening. So I think the first point for me is to let this young man know that I'm actually here to listen. I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to cause shame. I'm not here to cause any further discomfort. I want to listen. And I will, depending on what the personality I see, I may engage so that we can, sometimes it's easier when you don't go directly into the problem. So maybe to talk about something that is lighter, a lighter subject, find something to do together, a small activity, so that you can laugh a little bit and ease up the tension. And then maybe even in that first meeting, he's still not going to open up. And I'm still going to just remind him that, you know, I know what it's like to be a young man. If you want to talk at any point, this is my contact. This is how you can reach me. Can we meet again, for instance? So I think I want to motivate this young man to find his core, to find his strength. And one of the ways to do that is to, when you have nobody to talk to, when you have nobody that you feel is seeing you, you have nobody and you really feel that you're absolutely alone in the world, grab a pen and a book and write your story. As people have been written out of history, it's important that we write ourselves in. That might not solve everything, but it's a very important beginning. And I would like, that's not even for young people, that's for all of us. We need to write our story. Thank you.
Great, write yourself in. Definitely taking that one home. All right, over to you, Bongani. Please close off for us. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks everybody. It's always a pleasure to share my story and to be part of such an enriching conversation that I always say, I think we're 20 of us who started as 28, but even if we change just one person's story today, our job here would have been done, right? So with me, I just like finishing off with 5 things that are quite important. So I think the first thing is, whatever mental health challenge you've got, know that there's a solution and there's healing out there for you. It might either be sustained, might either be healing altogether or manageable healing, right? I think that's very important. The second thing is keep moving. So I've spoken about the importance of exercise. I always tell a story about when I came out of the hospital, I couldn't walk a kilometer, but what I learned to do, which I enjoyed to now, and I'm going to do it now, is iron, right? So ironing was a great thing for me. The third thing is about have things to fight for. It's important to have things to fight for. And mostly, actually not things, have people to fight for. For me, it was my family. All of us have got some important human being in our lives that gives us purpose every day to fight for. And I think it's always important to remind yourself about that fact that there is people out here who are wanting for me to get better, and I need to fight for them. The fourth thing for me is have a bigger purpose for yourself. And making money is not a bigger purpose, I've come to realize, or accumulating things is not a bigger purpose. Shea and Dr. Butu's his words about writing yourself in history could be a purpose. So what is your story? What story are you telling other people about yourself? Because I remember when I was struggling, all I wanted was to hear somebody tell me it will be okay. It just tell me it will be okay. It's fine. It's not okay today, but tell me that in a year's time, in 5 years' time, it will be okay. So it's important that we share our stories, because there's a lot of people who wanting to know, whatever situation they find themselves in, whether it's debt, depression, whatever, to know that it's going to be okay, because it's part of the human experience. Pain is part of the human experience, and we can't avoid it. And the last point is, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not be okay, and it's okay. And if people think that you're not okay because you're not okay, it's fine, it's on them. But for you, you can tell yourself, I'm not okay today, and it's okay. So thank you very much, everybody, for this time that we've shared together.
And thank you to all us, because really it's been a really great conversation. We've gone over time by about 8 minutes, so I will definitely close this webinar. I want to just close by saying that, as I said in the beginning, this is the first of many of similar conversations. Well, first for us at UJ, at IPATC, I know Mental Wellness Initiative are doing a lot more of this, in their own field, and, podcasts and various types of things. And I believe that we all are sharing either our contact details. I know Dr. Buntu, you wanted to know if it's okay to share your details. Please feel free to do so. So we will continue to share. And I think what we can all take home from this conversation, apart from the content, is that this topic of mental health is such a big topic. We cannot have done it in 1.5 hours. It definitely needs to happen over a couple of, series, and there are different aspects that need more time than others. And with that said, I also want to bring to your attention that as a partnership between us and mental wellness, but at UJ, we are having an upcoming conference by one of our colleagues, Dr. Ojo, is the Pan-African Women's Conference. And at that conference, which will be from the 30th of August till the 1st of September, there will definitely also be a panel on women and mental health, and also one on GBV. And that is also, with us, some of us here who are the organizers. So if you are available, check out on our websites, on the IPATC website, on the mental wellness website, on some of our social medias, we'll be advertising, and some of these conversations are going to be part of that conference as well. But in closing, I just want to say that we are Africans. We ought to be proud of who we are. What I loved about today's conversation is that it tells us that not only are we a beautiful people, but too often we've been told that there's something wrong and that we don't have the solution. And what I'm hearing today is that, first of all, there's nothing really wrong about us, but if there is something that is not going according to, because no one's life is perfect, we have the solutions, and the answer lies within us. And for me, that's very comforting to know that we don't have to wait for some evidence-based something that worked elsewhere, and for us to know that we are who we are waiting for. We are the solution. And so with that, I'd like to thank all of you. Thank you to our awesome speakers. Thank you to our audience, especially those who have stuck it out till the very end. Thank you to the team at Mental Wellness Initiative, but thank you very much to my IPATC team. I know that Mpumi, who started us off, has dropped off because of load shedding, but Tito is still here, and some of my other colleagues. Thank you so much for helping with the logistics, and have a blessed afternoon further. See you next time. Bye.
Thank you, Jabulo. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.